Hey everyone. I think I should be live now. Um, I've tried to stream like 10 different times and I still can't figure out OBS for the life of me. But anyway, um, obviously, yeah. Obviously, I'm watching the Israel's arguments at the International Court of Justice. Right now, I was watching that on my own, and then I decided that I might just like stream myself. Watching it because I know I have been kind of missing in action for a while. I'm looking at my settings, making sure that everything is displaying property. Aver- I don't know if there's a lag or not at this point. Anyway, they're taking a break right now. They're taking a break right now. I don't know if there's even anyone watching. Can you please just even tell me if there's a lag? Not that I even know how to fix it. I let's see. So yeah, I've been kind of quiet and missing maybe, but it's for a few reasons. I mean, I've been working on the website pretty much exclusively and very intensely, so I've done a lot of work in that regard, and I've kind of been realizing that I can either make videos or work on the website, but I can't really do everything at the same time. And the stuff happening right now in Gaza has been like really taking a toll on everyone, including me. So I've just can and and I wanted to make. I had a plan to make like videos, um, like I mean at the beginning, like I wanted me and my friend we had planned to make a video talking about all the lies being spread around, about the beheaded babies, about like all of this stuff. And then we kind of never did because of how just disturbing everything was and is. But it was also because like everyone else was making videos about this stuff as well. Like I mean, it was in the news, and it's like, do you really need to get this information from a channel about Palestinian Arabic? I guess like I mean, I want to talk about this all the time, and I do. But it's also like, if you needed me, of all people, to be telling you what's right and wrong, I mean, you need to get your moral instinct checked or something because, like, everything is already out there. So I don't really think that there's anything that I could say that brings something entirely new to the table. I mean, there's people already talking about this. So I was just feeling a lot of frustration and sense of not being sure what to do. And so I ended up doing nothing, at least for the channel. But I kept working on the website, and I actually have a lot of updates for the website that I need to talk about and announce. But at the same time, I felt like this is so irrelevant right now. Like it's really so irrelevant right now. The most important thing right now is this. Like this is so serious, and I don't even know if people realize how serious it is. It's really so serious. I mean, it has always been so serious, but it's really so serious. Like this is the most important thing that has happened like in my lifetime and even in the lifetime of people older than me, really. I mean, the repercussions of all of this are very significant. But anyway, I actually do have a lot to say about that, but um, I oh good. I think the stream is doing all right. Um, I hope. I mean, who knows? So, yeah, so they started talking at like, I mean, the whole thing started, I guess, at 10 a.m. It's 11:30 now. So there were like two speeches. Um, the first one was just like talking about how, um, and sorry, I'm not really even putting that much effort into like all of the stream right now because like I've done it like five different times and every time it like was busted the whole stream, like the audio or the lag or whatever. So I don't even know if I'm gonna keep this or delete it. So I'm just kind of, and also I think that I honestly don't even know where the audio is coming from. I'm not sure if it's coming if I'm speaking into the computer microphone or the earbuds microphone. I, so just I don't know. Just please bear with me. Actually, I'm gonna lower the levels for the mic because I think that it's a little bit overblown. So even this seems to be a little bit overblown. Okay, sorry, bear with me. So yeah, so the first speech was just this guy. Um, I mean, the whole case has been completely predictable. But the first guy, like it was so like he immediately started by saying that Israel is acutely aware, like literally his first sentence, Israel is acutely aware of the seriousness of the charges pressed, and you immediately know that he's going to talk about how Israel, as a Jewish state in particular, um, like has the memory of the Holocaust and all these things. So they know what a genocide is, and they would never do such. Anyway, they just they made the whole thing, and they are making the whole thing. I mean, mainly the first guy. The second guy kind of went more into. I mean, it kind of is the same thing. He went a little bit more into the legal stuff, but not really. So the first guy was just talking about how Hamas committed all kinds of atrocities, and they just like spun the whole thing to make it about Hamas and what Hamas has done, and essentially about Israel's right to protect itself and about the fact that Israel is a Jewish state and Jews were victims of the Holocaust, which is true, but that doesn't change anything. Just because you were the victim of something doesn't mean like that you can do the same thing. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, and then the second guy, yeah, the second guy was just trying to kind of um, essentially call into question the validity of South Africa's entire case um, by making all these spurious claims. Like, first of all, that South Africa you know, he said like first of all, or not first of all, but South Africa has ties with Hamas. It's like what the and I saw someone say that as well earlier, like that they're really trying to claim that South Africa is like the legal wing of Hamas, basically. And then and then he was talking about how like um, because South Africa brought up these statements by Israeli politicians and like stuff that the soldiers have been posting on social media and stuff like that. And basically, what the second guy tried to do is take those things. So he took the stuff that the soldiers have done and said, well, there's a chain of command because it's a military organization or whatever. So the IDF's directives are not to do these things, but the soldiers do it. But like that doesn't reflect a genocidal. Like there's no genocidal intent because it's just soldiers being a-holes and not that the actual IDF is like commanding them to do this. And then with regard to the statements by Israeli public officials and whatever, he basically just tried to say that they're bad apples and like, oh, well, you know, some people have said those things, but it doesn't. That's not really the intent of the organization as a whole. Um, so he just kind of tried to dismiss. I mean, it was really just a fancy dismissal of the whole case. That was the second one. So the second speaker just kind of did this kind of fancy. And sorry, and actually, I wasn't even paying like as much attention as I could have because I was trying to do all this OBS stuff. So apologize for the random summary. Um, but I don't know. I figured I might as well just try to stream because I think that and even if it doesn't work, at least I watched it. Because I guess there's probably going to be two more speakers. Um, because yesterday's, or maybe just one more. Yesterday's it ended at like 1:30, and it's like 11:30 right now, and they're taking a 10-minute break. Um, so yeah, I don't know, and I don't know if this stream is even gonna work out or not. Plus the time, it's like in the morning, and I think a lot of my viewers are in America, and they're probably not gonna be up seeing this or anything. But yeah, my friend is saying there's no way this is gonna work for Israel. I mean, yeah, I don't think so, but I really see everyone saying that it could really go either way. The verdict, or like whatever what the judges decide, because um I mean, no, it's my phone is, I'm using my phone to record. I'm just gonna read um, this commentary that I thought was very, like a good summary of what the situation is with regard to the case. It's like, I find it, on one hand, it seems implausible, or like, basically, it seems implausible that Israel would even win this case. Like, there's no way that they could win this case. And then on the other hand, it's like, um, if they do lose the case, that puts Israel, obviously, but also America in a really, really uh, ugly position. And I feel, and at the end of the day, if I understand correctly, and I'm gonna find this, but the enforcement of the verdict depends on like the Security Council, and America has veto power at the Security Council. So so the thing is, like, Israel could lose the case, and then America could just veto anything, and then that's kind of the end of the story. But at the same time, that would really be looking really bad for America. But at the same time, America looks bad all the time. Like, America vetoes stuff all the time, like literally all the time, in the Security Council. So, I mean, and they can just do that with impunity. They really can just do that with impunity. I mean, over time, America is going to continue losing support, which it already has been doing. Um, but it's tricky because, like, anyway, let's just find this. My likes. I mean, Europe thinks it needs America because of the whole Russia and Ukraine thing. So, I mean, yeah. Wait a second. There we go. No. Or yes? Okay. So, so it goes, either way, this is going to be historic. If the court says there is no risk of genocide, then Israel will know it can continue murdering innocent civilians under cover of international law, and it will empower tyrants and dictators the world over for years to come. In short, this bleak, broken world of ours will become even darker, even more dangerous. If they rule to stop Israel, it unequivocally shows Israel cannot ethnically cleanse Gaza, and means U.S. military support has to end, as they are subject to ICJ rulings being a UN member. Um, and there's more, but I don't know that U.S. military support has to end, because I believe that they can just veto this. Um, Anyway, so it has to end or at least change form, and so this could be a big step towards a free and sovereign Palestinian state. It's so big I can't help. Okay, anyway, that's the main thing. It seems like these guys are back. Um, so let's see what other maskhara they have for us.
Please be seated. The sitting is resumed, and I now give the floor to Ms. Galit Ragwan. You have the floor.
Madam President, members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you on behalf of the State of Israel. As Professor Shah noted, at this stage, South Africa does not need to prove that genocidal acts have been or are being committed. But it does have to show that the Genocide Convention is actually relevant. It has to show some level of acts and some level of intent. Professor Shah has spoken to the issue of express intent. It is my task to speak to the circumstances of Israel's actions. Israel cannot possibly comprehensively address today all of the allegations made in South Africa's application in this regard. The applicant paints a dire picture, but it is a partial and deeply flawed picture. The application is so distorted in its descriptions that it prevents the court from properly assessing the plausibility of the rights asserted by South Africa. Plausibility cannot be determined based on the unsubstantiated allegations alone if Article 41 of the court statute is to have any meaning. In the time available, I will address three aspects of reality on the ground that the applicant has either ignored or misrepresented. First, Hamas's military tactics and strategy. Second, Israel's efforts to mitigate civilian harm during operational activity. And third, Israel's efforts to address humanitarian hardship in Gaza, despite Hamas's attempts at obstruction.
First person who doesn't say
With
Hamas.
respect to Hamas's military tactics and strategy, it is astounding that in yesterday's hearing, Hamas was mentioned only in passing and only in reference to the October 7 massacre in Israel. Listening to the presentation by the applicant, it was as if Israel is operating in Gaza against no armed adversary, but the same Hamas that carried out the October 7 attacks in Israel is the governing authority in Gaza. And the same Hamas has built a military strategy founded on embedding its assets and operatives in and amongst the civilian population. Urban warfare will always result.
Yeah, I'm talking to my friend right now, and
harm,
he's saying, like, basically their whole argument is saying that we're not committing genocide because we said so.
These outcomes are exacerbated because they are the desired outcomes of Hamas.
Also, okay, shut up for a second. South Africa made this point, which is that no matter what the circumstances are or who you're fighting against or whatever, it's never allowed to, you can never commit genocide. And so basically she's saying, well, actually, South Africa acted as though Hamas doesn't exist and whatever. But the whole point is that even if, like, it doesn't, because they're waging this kind of, like, they're attacking all the civilians and even the hostages and everything. They're just killing everyone. Israel is doing in Gaza. So it's just all maskhara.
And over 2,000 rockets misfired by Hamas have landed inside Gaza, causing untold levels of harm.
Oh yeah, and they claim that the rockets hitting the hospitals are from Hamas.
Hospital on October 17.
Yeah, what?
Hamas claimed that the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, attacked the hospital. Headlines around the world rushed to repeat this claim. The IDF later
Headlines around the world,
US
as though
intelligence
headlines around the world weren't commenting on the freaking 40 beheaded babies, which was a total lie. And then all these recent stories about, I mean, this is so, like, touchy, but the issue about, like, sexual assault victims within Israel, like, if you go deep, I mean, if you look at the New York Times article and even the aftermath of that article, it's clear that, like, the so-called witnesses or whatever were just like being manipulated by the reporters. And also that a lot of these testimonies relied on like one witness basically, which wasn't even there, or like she wasn't. I don't know, but it's really the American and European headlines are the ones that are parroting all the Israeli IDF claims. So I don't know where she's just ridiculous.
Structures above to collapse. In the slide before you, you can see a militant priming projectiles for launch on IDF forces in Gaza. You can see the holes in the residential house.
Oh yeah, there's something else. There's something else that was mentioned earlier by the previous guy. He was saying like, "Oh, Hamas has committed certain atrocities, like even having their bases within hospitals. Oh my gosh, how could they possibly do that?" Girl, like you're the one who bombed the hospital, like, and and then you're claiming that Hamas is committing an atrocity by being inside of the hospital, which was then debunked. Like that was not even true at the end of the day.
Circled in red. And here, long-range rocket launchers hidden inside a Scouts Club building.
See, the point is that this doesn't matter. The point is that this actually doesn't change anything. It's still a freaking genocide.
Including nearby the Erez Crossing, which is adjacent to Israel. Gaza's infrastructure has certainly been harmed during the conflict. However, South Africa would have the court believe that Israel is deliberately and unlawfully destroying homes without cause. But harm caused
Okay, where's your
to
evidence
military
that they aren't
objectives
doing that?
and harm
Where's your
caused
evidence
as a
that they're
result
not
of
doing
Hamas's
that?
actions is not evidence of genocide. South Africa also alleges that Israel has waged an assault on Gaza's health system. What South Africa has neglected to bring before the court, however, is the overwhelming evidence of Hamas's military use of such hospitals. Hamas militants retreated to Rantisi Hospital in Gaza on October 7th with hostages from Israel, whom they then held in the basement. In the slide before you, you will see a militant going into Quds Hospital with an RPG. Hamas fired at IDF forces from near and from within the Quds Hospital. At Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest, Hamas managed operations from a closed-off area. Here you can see an opening to the tunnel that ran for hundreds of meters directly under the hospital. Here you can see the weapons found in different wings of the hospital. And here, CCTV footage showing armed militants bringing hostages into the hospital's lobby. More than 80 militants hiding inside another hospital, the Adwan Hospital, surrendered themselves to the IDF. And here, you can see a weapon that IDF forces discovered hidden inside incubators at the hospital. The director of the hospital has admitted that numerous members of hospital staff belong to Hamas's military wing. In the Indonesian hospital in the neighborhood of Jabalia, Hamas forces managed their
news to me.
operations from that hospital until the IDF reached it. IDF forces recovered the bodies of 5 murdered hostages from a tunnel dug underneath the hospital. The list goes on. In every single hospital that the IDF has searched in Gaza, it has found evidence of Hamas military use.
You know, I don't
Israel
think
is
this really
acutely
even
aware
changes
that because of
anything. I
Hamas's
don't even
use
think
of
this
hospitals and
changes
its
anything,
military
but
operations in
I just,
violation
even if it were true, and yet I find it so hard to believe that so many of this is true because they lie so much. So how do they expect anyone to believe them, even? And even if it were true, it doesn't actually change anything. I mean, in fact, if it were up to me, well, I don't, never mind.
The IDF sends soldiers to search and dismantle military infrastructure, reducing damage and disruption. Indeed, the tunnel that sat directly under the main building in Shifa Hospital was exploded without damaging the building above. The IDF then withdrew from the hospital.
I mean, I was just gonna say, like, if I needed a place to keep hostages safe, I would put them in the hospital because I would think that the hospital will not get bombed, so I can keep the hostages. Because if Hamas had the hostages in their some kind of like open air base or whatever, they're just going to get bombed, and Israel's going to end up killing all the hostages. So even if the hostages were being kept like in the hospital, you would think that that's where they would be safe, but of course not. Israel just bombs it. So
of international humanitarian law. It has brought journalists to see firsthand. It has recorded calls with hospital staffs to coordinate assistance. None of that is mentioned in the application. In fact, the applicant describes the result and asks the court to attribute malicious intent to Israel. But that is only a possible conclusion if one obscures, as the applicant has, Hamas's strategy of turning hospitals into terrorist compounds. The applicant also made much of the
that's
fact
such an
that force
exaggeration
has
as
been
well.
even
Like,
used in humanitarian zones. What the applicant neglected to inform the court, however, was that Hamas has, in its contempt for Palestinian civil life, regularly and deliberately fired from such zones, turning areas of relief into
yeah, I
zones
know.
of conflict.
Thank you. One of the commenters
Here,
is
before you, you
saying
can see
something
one
useful.
example.
Yeah, I mean, they said there are no hostages in hospitals. They released the released hostages, all described being treated well. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't know. I didn't watch. I missed some of the South Africa hearing yesterday, and I don't think they probably even talked about the hostages because I don't think that that was part of the argument that South Africa was trying to make. But if you actually look at the interviews with the hostages and footage and all of that, like they were being like actually treated well and being tried to, like they were trying to keep them safe essentially and healthy and all of that so that they could exchange them for Palestinian political prisoners. That's the whole point of having a hostage. Like these were not like people in a dungeon being tortured just to torture them. The whole point is to do like an exchange, and so you can't like torture and maim and torture your hostages if you want to exchange them. But by the way, what happened when Israel actually exchanged some of the hostages for Palestinian political prisoners? They beat, tortured, and maimed and like starved basically the Palestinians that Israel then released. So Israel actually did that, but Hamas was actually trying to keep the hostages in like a suitable enough situation. So anyway, it's just completely bonkers.
All the more so when one party makes a concerted effort to use those civilians as shields. The IDF
The same story.
maintains a civilian harm mitigation unit to undertake this task. It works full-time to provide advance notice of areas in which the IDF intends to intensify its activities. Coordinate
That doesn't mean that
travel
you're
routes for
allowed to do
civilians
that. Just because I
security
tell
threats.
I can't just tell you I'm gonna bomb your house, and then because you didn't leave your house, it's your fault that you died. That's not how it works.
On the slide before you, you can see that map divided into areas, as well as a screenshot of a video explaining the system in Arabic so civilians may understand it. The IDF also enacts localized
doesn't mean
clauses
it's
in its
fine to do.
operations to allow civilians to move. It does this even though Hamas does not agree to do the same, and has even attacked IDF forces securing humanitarian corridors.
Excuse me, I have a request from the interpreters that you slow down the pace of your speaking. Could you please do that? Thank
Of course. Yesterday, South Africa stated that the IDF gave 24 hours notice to civilians in northern Gaza to evacuate. In fact, the IDF urged civilians to evacuate to southern Gaza for over 3 weeks before it started its ground operation. 3 weeks that provided Hamas with advance knowledge of where and when the IDF would be operating. This 3-week period for temporary evacuation is a matter of common knowledge, and the applicant's misrepresentation of this fact is at best an unfamiliarity with the events, and at worst, a desire to tailor its story to a pre-existing narrative. The IDF employs a range of additional measures in accordance with the obligation to take precautionary measures under international humanitarian law. For example, it provides effective advance warnings of attacks where circumstances permit, To date, the IDF has dropped millions of leaflets over areas of expected attacks with instructions to evacuate and how to do so, broadcast countless messages over radio and through social media, warning civilians to distance themselves from Hamas operations, and made over 70,000...
Yeah, this comment is useful as well. Their argument is that resistance is futile because it will lead to aggression by the occupation. Essentially, yeah, it's blaming Palestinians for resisting the siege, occupation, apartheid, and everything that Israel is committing. Like, essentially, like I've seen people say, they want Palestinians to be the perfect victims. Just die quietly, do not resist, do not, I know you don't like what's going on with you and the blockade and Gaza and everything, but you just got to deal with it, because if you pipe up, we're gonna fucking bomb. Sorry, I'm getting demonetized anyway, and you know what? I don't care about I don't care, to be honest. This is just ridiculous. This is just completely
A
ridiculous.
measure intended to mitigate harm to the civilian population, sometimes exceeding the requirements of international humanitarian law, is proof, according to the applicant, of Israel's intent to commit genocide, when in fact it proves the exact opposite. My third topic, with respect to the humanitarian situation. Much attention was given by South Africa to this situation. Despite Israel's efforts to mitigate harm, there is no question that many civilians in Gaza are suffering as a result of the war that Hamas began. While Israel is seeking to minimize civilian harm, Hamas is doing everything in its power to use the civilian population and civilian infrastructure for its own protection, thwarting humanitarian efforts.
I mean, they're just defending themselves, like, in general. This is like, what does this have to do with the genocide? Like, I mean, it just, they're just defending themselves in general. It's not really not really countering South Africa's case, because there's no way that they can counter it. Like, what about the fact that everyone is freaking starving and they're not allowing any humanitarian aid, and like, it's just...
Israel maintains a dedicated military unit called COGAT, responsible for routine coordination with international organizations in Gaza with respect to various humanitarian aspects. It is COGAT that mans and operates the crossings between Israel and Gaza. This includes the Erez crossing, through which prior to October 7, almost 20,000 Gazans passed through into Israel daily for work. South Africa showed a map yesterday with the Erez crossing marked closed. What it failed to note is that the crossing was attacked on October 7th by Hamas, which murdered and kidnapped COGAT staff and caused significant damage. Here you can see some of that damage. Nevertheless, COGAT works around the clock to fulfill its role. Its large professional staff run numerous initiatives, of which I will only mention a few. First, COGAT manages a mechanism by which it maintains an up-to-date picture.
Honestly, it's just mind-boggling. Like, if we were from another planet, right, or from far in the future, and we looked back at this and we saw that this small territory, which does not qualify as its own country or whatever, so in some kind of way Israel is responsible for it, and they just build a whole freaking wall around it, and then when the people living in this besieged territory destroy the infrastructure used to, like, basically keep them in this concentration camp, then it's actually their fault. Like, it's just ridiculous, really, that any of this is happening. It's just completely ridiculous, and it has always been completely ridiculous. Like, you really just need to take a step back to see how obscene it is and unfathomable.
Acknowledged by the Security Council in Resolution 2720, despite Hamas putting it under fire. Israel has offered to extend operating hours at the crossing if there is a capacity to receive the goods by international organizations on the Gazan side. Third, COGAT works to reinforce and strengthen medical services. COGAT has facilitated the huge logistical challenge of establishing 4 field hospitals in Gaza, and more are being set up, and 2 floating hospitals. It has facilitated the entry of new ambulances into Gaza, and Israel has even coordinated airdrops of aid over Gaza by Jordan, coordinating these flights with the Israel Air Force operating in Gaza.
Is she
This,
talking
of
about
course,
where
is not
Jordan
to
and
say
France
that nothing
airdropped
more
like
can be done, or that there are
humanitarian
no
aid? Is
challenges
she
to
saying
the
that Israel
humanitarian
coordinated that?
situation in Gaza. Such challenges exist and change according to the evolving circumstances of the conflict. But it is to say that the
I
charge
mean,
of genocide
who in the
in the
audience
face of
believes
these
any of
extensive
what she's saying? I
efforts
mean, it's just completely
is
ridiculous.
frankly untenable. It is an inconvenient truth for the applicant's case, but one of the most significant challenges is the fact that Hamas commandeers consignments into Gaza and controls their distribution. Gazan residents have reported that Hamas is regularly stealing aid at the expense of its own population for the benefit of its fighters. This is a tweet stating that fuel and medical equipment was stolen by purported Hamas members from an UNRWA warehouse. UNRWA later deleted the tweet, perhaps under pressure from the authorities. Here you can see Hamas commandeering an aid truck. And here is another example. Because Hamas for years has used aid consignments to smuggle weapons, security checks of all goods going into Gaza are required, as acknowledged by international humanitarian law. Hamas has time and again hoarded fuel, including during the current conflict, which it uses for military purposes to sustain ventilation in its expansive underground tunnel network and for its continued attacks against Israel. Nevertheless, in coordination with the UN, Israel enables fuel to enter Gaza to service essential infrastructure such as sewage treatment, desalination plants, water pumps and hospitals, and cellular infrastructure for maintaining communication.
Yeah, in fact, Israel controls exactly how much calories enter Gaza per Gazan so that they have just enough to survive, but not enough to, like, in general, not enough fuel and resources to actually build a thriving society. Not that you can build a thriving society in a besieged coastal enclave, which doesn't even have, they can't even use their even waters and trade with people. So it's really, they want people to like live a very precarious life within this concentration camp based with as little as possible, and but just enough to not be starving to death, because then it's a genocide or whatever. But it's a genocide anyway.
By COGAT. And finally, more consignments waiting to enter Gaza. Madam President, members of the court, in the time allotted, I have been able to describe only some of Israel's efforts to mitigate civilian harm and to address the humanitarian situation in Gaza. But even this mere fraction is enough to demonstrate how tendentious
Okay, I see. Hamas regarding the trucks not stealing them. Yeah, I mean,
is and so
I'm with you there. I mean, it's all BS anyway.
genocide.
The thing is, it's kind of hard almost sometimes, like,
If Israel had
for people who don't have every single fact and they're not following up on every single thing, right? If they just see this, right? If they just see the pictures of Hamas people on the trucks or whatever, they don't know what to think because they don't have all, they're not following up on everything. So they're really, Israel's manipulating people's, it's not even ignorance, but just like, you know, people don't know what to believe. Anyway, there was something else I was gonna, I don't know, I forgot what I was gonna say.
aid and who continue to do so despite having their staff killed and kidnapped? When a population is ruled by a terrorist organization that cares more about wiping out its neighbor than about protecting its own civilians, there are acute challenges in protecting the civilian population. Those challenges are exacerbated by the dynamic and evolving nature of intense hostilities in an urban area, where the enemy exploits hospitals, shelters, and critical infrastructure. Would Israel work continuously with international organizations and states, even reaching out to them on its own initiative, to find solutions to these challenges if it were seeking to destroy the population? Israel's efforts to mitigate the ravages of this war on civilians are the very opposite of intent to destroy them. Under these circumstances, far from being the only inference that could reasonably be drawn from Israel's pattern of conduct, intent to commit genocide is not even a plausible inference. Madam President, members of the Court, that concludes my statement. I thank you for your kind attention, and I ask that you now invite Mr. Sender to the podium.
I thank Ms. Radwan, and I invite Mr. Omri Sender to address the Court. You have the floor.
Madam President, members of the Court, it is an honor to appear before you today on behalf of the State of Israel. It falls to me to address the condition of risk of irreparable harm and urgency. This third condition is, of course, dependent on the two preceding ones. Professor Shaw and Ms. Radwan have already shown that the provisions relied upon by the applicant do not afford even prima facie, a basis on which this Court's jurisdiction could be founded. They also showed that the rights asserted by the applicant cannot be regarded as plausible. It follows that the irreparable consequences cannot, in the present case, be caused by the alleged disregard of rights under the Genocide Convention. Again, this is not at all to say that the humanitarian situation arising from the present armed conflict is not grave. Civilians have been severely affected by the hostilities instigated by Hamas. Its systematic strategy of prosecuting war from under and within the civilian population exposes civilians to great risk, and it has brought about great suffering. Israel has done and is doing a great deal to alleviate this suffering in very challenging circumstances. In this regard, the factual account provided by the applicant is once again entirely one-sided. The application and request run no less than 84 pages, but they make hardly any mention of the extraordinary efforts undertaken by Israel and by a host of other states and international actors to improve the humanitarian situation. We again heard virtually nothing from the applicant on this issue yesterday. But this is a critical factor in the request before you. As Ms. Radwan has shown, it frustrates any attempt to establish the necessary special intent for genocide. It also bears upon the third condition established in your case law. Madam President, members of the Court, we know from your case law that the power of the Court to indicate provisional measures will be exercised only in exceptional circumstances. There needs to be, as you have said, a real and imminent risk that irreparable prejudice will be caused to the rights claimed before the Court gives its final decision. Your order in the Myanmar case, in which the Genocide Convention was also invoked, suggests that the adoption, and I quote, of concrete measures aimed specifically in recognizing and ensuring the right, end of quote, of the group in question to exist would mean that irreparable harm and urgency cannot be established. Precisely such concrete measures have been taken by Israel. which has been facilitating the provision of more and more humanitarian assistance for people in need throughout the Gaza Strip. These steps have not only been increasing so as to meet the developing situation on the ground. They are continuously undertaken specifically in order to prevent harm to the civilian population. These efforts have had an impact. Just last week, for example, with the assistance of the World Food Programme, a dozen bakeries reopened with the capacity to produce more than 2 million breads a day. The World Food Programme has said the delivery of flour, salt, sugar, and yeast continues so as to enable more bakeries to reopen, increasing accessibility and affordability for thousands of families. And since the applicant mentioned yesterday the number of trucks entering Gaza each day before and after the war, the accurate average number for trucks specifically carrying food is 70 trucks a day before the war and 109 trucks a day over the last 2 weeks. All this information may be found in your judge's folder. Access to water has also been a priority. As with food supplies, there is no restriction on the amount of water that may enter Gaza. Israel continues to supply its own water to Gaza by 2 pipelines. It facilitates the delivery of bottled water in large quantities, and it repairs and indeed expands water infrastructure that has been damaged by the fighting. An additional water pipe bringing water into southern Gaza from Egypt.
No, I was literally just thinking that. I was like, who bombed the bakeries? So, like, the bakeries are reopening. Yeah, who bombed them in the first place? And, like, why? Okay, so Israel's doing all these things to deliver aid, supposedly. Why is this aid needed? Why do people not have water, right? Why do people not have food? Just because Hamas bombed the bakeries and Hamas bombed all these things? Don't be completely ridiculous. I mean, honestly, I almost just want to stop watching because I'm not even mad. It's just like, it's just pointless. I mean, we get it. You're just going to say that everything that South Africa said is BS. I mean, fine. We knew you were going to say that. They're not really bringing, yeah, we're not even, we're not really learning anything new. We already knew that this is what you're going to say.
As well. The constant delivery of fuel and cooking gas is also facilitated. According to official data, again in your judges' folders, from 8 December, the amount of fuel entering Gaza has doubled and currently stands...
I don't know. I mean, like, even, like, the thing is, they can just claim this, right? And I doubt that this is even true. But even if it is somehow true, like, I mean, the reality speaks for itself. 4 out of 5 people experiencing conditions of starvation today, this was mentioned yesterday, 4 out of 5 people experiencing conditions of starvation today are in Gaza. So, I mean, even if you're actually doing all these things that you're claiming that you're doing, where, like, how, clearly that doesn't translate into any meaningful reality. And the meaningful, and also you're talking about, like, keeping civilians safe and everything, like, over 20,000 people have died. So I really don't understand how, like, the reality just speaks for itself. Just claim whatever you want to claim. We really don't, even if it were somehow true, it's not translating into anything meaningful. And besides, it's actually irrelevant because at the end of the day, what you've been doing in Gaza, in Palestine in general, really, for decades, is just unconscionable. So really, it's just, it was all BS. Like, even before October 7th, like, even what is happening now, it's terrible. I mean, it's definitely terrible, but it was already bad. Like, it was already so wrong, and it already needed to end. And this is also not the first time that you've waged war on Gaza. 2021, 2014. It's just, like, over and over again, and they call it, like, mowing the lawn or whatever. Again, sort of any time that Gaza starts not really thriving, but, like, whatever, they just go and bomb everything, and then people start building back up, and then they just bomb it again, and they always keep the population in this kind of precarious condition. I mean, say whatever you want to say. It's just useless.
This has eased congestion at the Rafah crossing and helped facilitate the provision of greater amounts of aid.
Yet they won't be punished. They will be supported. This is true. They will be supported by America in particular, the West in general. I think that there will be eventual consequences for the people who are supporting Israel, and I don't mean consequences because the ICJ or something is going to rule or sanction America, for example. But America was going to start to feel it domestically because I really think that like slowly more and more Americans are kind of catching up to what's going on, especially because economic conditions in America are worsening. And so America is kind of grasping to what remains of its international power militarily because its economic power is declining. So it's just kind of gasping for air and trying to hold on any way they can by military force. And now they're bombing Yemen and using all these American taxpayer dollars. Now, I don't really care about American taxpayer dollars. Like, I really think that that's not what's unconscionable about all of this. It's about the fact that they're murdering millions of people. But at least as far as Americans themselves are concerned, you know, when they start to connect the economic precarity that they're in to what their country is doing or what their country is spending money on, hopefully people are going to start making that connection, and I think that that has started happening because Biden's approval rate, even among Democrats, is like worsening and worsening, and that means that his chances in the upcoming election are really becoming slimmer. His chances for the upcoming election are becoming slimmer. At the same time, his opponent is Trump. So I think Americans are going to have a really tough election this year. They're going to really, I don't know what they're going to decide, but no matter what it is, it's going to be awful.
This statement, made in an interview to international media, is found at tab 16A of the volume submitted. This week, on 8 January, the spokesperson for the Israeli military confirmed.
Again, another comment. Did you watch the photos taken by the occupation soldiers after filming a propaganda scene? And you can see some of them getting dressed in the background. I believe it. And I mean, there are a lot of claims going around. And I mean, I believe that Israel is capable of the worst. I really do. So it's not that I actually doubt any of these claims. It's just that I like to see I like to see it with my own eyes, or like just verify. Yeah. So I didn't see this, but there you go. There's something out there where they're filming this stuff. I mean, there's definitely staged photos. I forgot about this even. I just remembered now. There are these staged photos of like a knife and like a pool of blood, but it's like clearly fake blood, and it's like this is what Hamas did, and it's literally like clearly a pool of fake blood with like the knife like position. It was like some photographer came and set up the whole freaking scene. It looks like probably like a freaking food photographer or something, because like it was all set up to be like all nice and propagandistic. So they fake this kind of stuff all the time. Now, the one claim that I've seen, which is really intense, but totally plausible considering what Israel has and continues to do, is that there are reports that some corpses have disappeared within Gaza and that they have been taken by the Israeli authorities. For what reasons, I don't know. I don't know to what extent this has been verified or whatever, but it totally makes sense. So the bodies have been confirmed to have been taken, and then there are these photos of like all the people in after the October 7th attack, the Israel shared these pictures of like bodies bloody and like thrown around and everything as like the victims of the Hamas attack. And there have been accusations of that Israel might actually be using the Palestinian corpses to pass them as their own victims. I don't know if anyone has seen if this has been like completely verified. I know that, I mean, I'm sure that the claim about the Israel taking bodies is true because they do harvest organs from Palestinian corpses when they can. This has been well documented, but I don't know if they actually ended up using those for their propaganda pictures. But I mean, they do doctor these kinds of pictures, like the one with the knife and the pool of blood. That was like completely clearly false. So yeah, it's kind of like with with how much they lie, with how much they lie, you just can't believe anything they say. So even if they said something that were true, like it's just you can't like how can you even listen to anything they say?
For awarding interim relief. They also suggest that the difference between the present case and earlier cases that have come before you are very clear. Finally, the lack of urgency within the meaning of the court's case law is further demonstrated by assurances provided before you today by Israel's co-agents. They could not be clearer in stating that Israel remains bound at all times by its international legal obligations. Needless to say,
Israel's not bound by
this
anything.
includes
Israel's not
Israel's
bound by anything.
obligations
They just do whatever they
as a state
want because
party
America
to
gives
the
them a free
Genocide
pass later.
Convention. The applicant will have this court say that it cannot take the word of a state. That would be not only unfortunate, it would also be contrary to the law on unilateral declarations of states. Unsurprisingly, your consistent case law suggests that assurances of the kind offered by Israel may well render the indication of provisional measures unnecessary. Madam President, members of the court, the conclusion is that the condition of irreparable prejudice and urgency cannot be met. It is Israel and its citizens who would risk irreparable harm if the request of South Africa were to be granted. Madam President,
Really?
distinguished members of the court, that concludes my statement. I thank you for your kind attention, and I ask that you now invite Mr. Staker to the podium.
I thank Mr. Sender, and I now invite Mr. Christopher Staker to take the floor. You have the floor, sir.
Madam President, Mr. Vice President, members of the court, it's an honor to appear before you again and to represent the State of Israel. You've now been addressed on why the conditions for provisional measures are not met. That being so, there's no need to examine the 9 particular measures that South Africa requests. Nonetheless, for completeness, I will address each in turn and show that their terms are unwarranted in any event. They go beyond what is necessary to protect rights on an interim basis and therefore also have no link with the rights sought to be protected. I start with the first and second requested measures. These would require immediate suspension of Israel's military operations in Gaza. This request is frankly astonishing. A request is made by a state not party to an ongoing conflict for provisional measures requiring unilateral suspension of military operations by one party to the conflict only.
Right, but even if you reject that it's a genocide, like they're doing that on the basis that it's a genocide and them being a party to the Genocide Convention. So it's the fact that they're not party to this conflict doesn't make any difference. Okay, you reject the premise that it's genocide, but it's not that their act is just completely random.
In the Russia case, the legality of the military operation itself was in issue by reference to the Genocide Convention. Russia had claimed that its military operation was to prevent and punish genocide being committed in Ukraine. The court found it doubtful that the Genocide Convention authorizes a unilateral use of force in the territory of another state, and plausible that Ukraine had a right not to be subjected to military operations by Russia for that purpose. The result, provisional measures could protect a plausible right not to be subjected to military operations. In this case, Israel does not rely on the Genocide Convention or Prevention of Genocide to justify its operations. The lawfulness of the operations themselves does not involve any interpretation, application, or fulfillment of the Convention over which the court has jurisdiction. As jurisdiction in this case is based solely on Article 9 of the Convention, the court cannot find that South Africa or Palestinians in Gaza have a plausible right of the kind in the Russia case. Article 41 of the statute empowers only such provisional measures as the circumstances require to preserve the respective rights of either party. In the Russia case, a suspension of military operations might have been necessary to preserve a right not to be subjected to military operations. But in this case, the right in issue is South Africa's claimed right to ensure observance of the Genocide Convention. It's absurd to suggest that the only way to ensure observance of the Genocide Convention in a military operation is to prevent the operation from being conducted at all, in order, according to South Africa, to secure the humanitarian response and avoid yet more unnecessary death and destruction. That goes beyond preventing genocide. South Africa appears to argue that the military operations
So
as such...
then how do you prevent the genocide? So he's saying that you can't prevent a genocide, or the way to prevent the genocide from happening isn't by preventing the military operation from happening at all. So what? We just ask Israel to behave? I mean, no.
How does at least some acts turn into the military operations as such? The pictures shown yesterday of various individual incidents, whatever they may or may not say about those incidents, are not evidence of the intent of the military operations as a whole. Professor Shaw has addressed you on why the statements of holders of official positions relied on by South Africa do not establish a plausible claim of genocidal intent. The inevitable fatalities and human suffering of any conflict is not of itself a pattern of conduct that plausibly shows genocidal intent.
Wow, so everything that has happened in Gaza is just inevitable? It's just inevitable? That's what you're saying?
Under Article 41 of the statute. They go well beyond anything required to preserve the specific rights in issue, namely the observance of the Convention in military operations. They seek instead to shut down the military operations themselves. The requested measures seek to reverse the Bosnia case. When provisional measures were ordered in that case, the armed conflict was still in progress. The allegations in that case were similar to those made in this case. Bosnia and Herzegovina specifically requested a provisional measure requiring Yugoslavia to cease and desist from any and all types of military or paramilitary activities against the people, state, and government of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But the court did not grant it, even though, unlike in this case, an ongoing genocide was said to be in progress on the territory of the very state seeking provisional measures, and both parties to the conflict were parties to the case.
Hamas is not a party. This was already said yesterday. Hamas is not a party to the Genocide Convention. It's not a state, so it can't even do that. Really, you're saying like, well, the person that we're committing a genocide against needs to be the one who brings this case against us. Isn't that what he's saying? Well, they can't, literally, because they're not a party to the Genocide Convention, period. This is just, it's all just smoke and mirrors.
If, as in this case, they would cause irreparable prejudice to the respondent or are out of proportion with the protection that they're intended to give to the applicant. The fact is that provisional measures impose burdens on the party to which they are addressed in order to protect potentially non-existent rights of another party. It would be contrary to the sovereign equality of states for such burdens to be imposed without regard to their effects on the state to which they are addressed. As Judge Abraham said in the pulp mills case, in a request for provisional measures, the court is faced with conflicting rights claimed by the respective parties and cannot avoid weighing those rights against each other. In the Financing of Terrorism Convention case, Judge Tomka said that the court, when considering requests for provisional measures, is expected to weigh and balance the respective rights of the parties. He went on to note, citing specific examples, that this requirement has been observed in the court's practice. The court has made clear in other provisional measures orders that it must preserve the respective rights of both parties. Its established jurisprudence is that Article 41 of the statute, quote, has as its object the preservation of the respective rights claimed by the parties, unquote. That is to say, both parties. The respective rights to be preserved are thus not only the plausible but yet to be determined rights claimed by the applicant, but also the plausible and yet to be determined rights of the respondent to engage in conduct that provisional measures would restrain. Other international dispute settlement fora also balance the interests of both parties when ordering provisional measures. Already a century ago, a mixed arbitral tribunal recognized a principle that the possible injury to the addressee of provisional measures must not be out of proportion with the advantage which the claimant hopes to derive from them. The Institute of International Law has now recognized a general principle of law that international and national courts and tribunals may grant interim relief and, as a requirement for such measures, that the risk of injury to the applicant must outweigh the risk of injury to the respondent. This principle is also recognized by other international dispute settlement mechanisms. Other principles applied when...
Actually, this whole defense is just all over the place. It is all over the place. They're talking about like 100 different things. It's kind of hard to follow even. Like, I mean, they're just arguing like 100 different things at the same time. Sometimes they're accepting the basis of I don't know. The whole thing is just chaotic, and it's really just hot air to confuse everyone and really just then pretend that they said something useful and meaningful. South Africa's case was actually so clear and like sort of to the point, really. And I think they have to do this, Israel, because they just have no case. They really have no case. And so they're just saying, well, actually, we're supplying humanitarian aid. I mean, the facts speak for themselves. I have nothing left to say, really.
In existence during the Second World War, and that the Allied powers were all parties to the convention without reservation, while the Axis powers were not. Suppose that a neutral state had brought proceedings against the Allied powers alleging breaches of the Genocide Convention and their conduct of hostilities, and requesting provisional measures requiring the Allies to cease hostilities immediately, invoking pictures of civilian fatalities and suffering in the war as a plausible claim. Such provisional measures would have required the Allies to surrender to the Axis powers, even though the case against them might later have been held to be wholly unfounded. They're really comparing Hamas with Nazi Germany. They're really comparing Hamas with Nazi Germany, and they're comparing themselves with the Allied powers. I mean, I can't say I'm surprised because nothing they do surprises me. It's just kind of like, it's like a new episode in a comedy series. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, how do they even come up with this? provisional measures require a state to refrain from exercising a
Oh,
plausible right to
Lee, yeah, no, I'm not calm. I mean, maybe I seem calm, but I hear this every single day. I mean, the reason I'm even able to make this video or this stream right now is because it's been after like 3 months. I'm like not desensitized by it, but like I've seen it all, and like every day is just horrible, and this it's just ridiculous. I mean, I just don't even care anymore what, like, because I know that it's just BS, and it makes me mad, but I don't know. That's why I didn't make any videos or comments before, because I was just so freaking pissed off. But now it's just like, say whatever you want to say. We already know the truth. We already know that it's just all hot air. And I think it makes me angry when it mostly makes me angry when people on the ground who are not either Israelis or like defending, like actual spokespeople for Israel, like the fact that spokespeople for Israel say these kinds of things, it's like whatever. I mean, we know what their argument is. We know what they have to say. It's like when Benjamin Netanyahu says stuff, it's like whatever. I knew you were gonna say that. But it what really actually gets to me more is when random people that have nothing, yeah, when people who have nothing to do with the whole thing come out in support of Israel. It's like, who are you? Why are you defending this? You have no reason to do so, and it just shows the Israeli capabilities of brainwashing, and it really is upsetting when I see that. Sorry, I missed what he was saying about the.
an organization recognized internationally as terrorist has committed a terrorist atrocity in the territory of a state. And a third state now seeks an order from this court that would prevent the attacked state from responding, but which would impose no obligation on those responsible for the attack. The requested measures would not put an end to the conflict, but only to military operations by one party to the conflict. These measures would assist the other party and encourage the commission of further terrorist attacks. In this respect also, the Russia case is fundamentally distinguishable from this case. Provisional measures should be a temporary shield to preserve claimed but as yet unproven rights pending a decision on the merits. Instead, they're being used here as a sword to give an advantage to one party in a conflict over another. The irreparable prejudice to Israel is obvious, so is the lack of proportionality. Madam President, members of the court, Israel's position is that there is
If Israel is found to be committing a genocide, that will give Hamas the upper hand. That's what he concluded.
This would require Israel to take all reasonable measures to prevent genocide. This is analogous to the first provisional measure in both the Bosnia case and the Myanmar case. There are two further objections to this measure. First, its wording is not confined to the current military operations in Gaza. It's expressed to apply in relation to the Palestinian people generally. This opens the possibility to later claims that actions by Israel having nothing to do with Gaza are in breach of this provisional measure. While the Convention obligation to prevent genocide may not be confined to current operations in Gaza, the subject matter of this...
I have a whole thing to say about this, about classifying resistant movements as terrorists, about the use of the word terrorist in general. That's like, that word is like a red flag for me, because it's, if you pay attention to it and start paying attention, like, it means nothing, and it can be applied to anything that you just don't like. Like, anything can just be a terrorist. And that's why I kind of sort of flip it back and I say that, you know, Israel is a terrorist state, or like I call like attacks of white supremacy in America, like those are terrorists, which they are actually. Even the American government kind of has said those things. You know, I'm always using, if I ever use the word terrorist, it's kind of like as a political statement against the use of the word terrorist, and I'm trying to flip that so that people see that it can actually just be applied to anything. Because I mean, if you look at it literally, terrorism is using fear as a political tactic, and that's what Israel is doing, isn't it? Like, after all, they're trying to, by sort of using collective punishment, they are trying to scare the entire Palestinian population from resisting them. So this is terrorism. So really, I mean, I don't know. I really don't think that you using this narrow definition of terrorism, and indeed, I don't think that terrorism can be defined in any other way, right? It's just using terror as a political tactic. I don't think that this is even what Hamas is doing per se. Like, so I don't know. I think I wouldn't even call Hamas a terrorist. They are who is? Oh, they are terrorists. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if anyone is using terror and fear as a political tactic to achieve their goals, it's Israel. Because what is Hamas gaining from making Israelis afraid? Like, I don't. It doesn't make sense. So anyway.
Obligations under the Convention, it's quite another to imply that a state has failed to do so. While provisional measures are without prejudice to the merits, such an implied finding will tarnish the reputation of the respondent state, which is not only unprincipled, but also unnecessary within the meaning of Article 41 of the statute to protect claimed rights on an interim basis. Third, this measure refers to acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention. Now, although an act is not within the scope of Article 2 unless it's committed with genocidal intent, the proposed wording leaves scope for South Africa subsequently to argue that the words mean only the acts themselves, whether committed with genocidal intent or not. On that interpretation, the effect would be to shut down Israel's military operation. Every killing or wounding of an opposing combatant by Israeli forces, every collateral civilian casualty, no matter how lawful under international humanitarian law, would be a breach of this provisional measure. Even security checks by Israeli forces of humanitarian aid entering Gaza, in accordance with international humanitarian law as recognized by Security Council Resolution 2720, might be argued to be a breach. The request for this measure should be rejected for the same reasons as the first and second measures. I next address the fifth requested measure. This specifies types of acts to be regarded as deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction for purposes of the fourth provisional measure. This measure is also objectionable. First, it's not a freestanding measure, but an elaboration of paragraph C of the fourth measure. If the fourth measure is not granted, then the fifth measure falls away. Secondly, no analogous provision is found in the provisional measures order in the Bosnia and Myanmar cases, and no special need for such a new measure is established. Third, it again uses the word desist. Fourth, it seeks further impermissible implied rulings on the merits. For instance, it refers to so-called expulsion and forced displacement of Palestinians from their homes. This is an apparent reference to Israel's practice of issuing calls for civilians to temporarily evacuate areas of intense hostilities, which is in fact a measure to mitigate harm to civilians. This measure thus seeks the court's ruling that evacuation calls amount to expulsion and forced displacement of Palestinians from their homes. Does South Africa suggest that Israel should cease giving warnings to civilians before military operations? How would that protect the rights that South Africa claims? Similarly, paragraph C of this measure seeks the court's ruling that damage to buildings in military operations, presumably even when lawful under international humanitarian law, amount to the destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza. Overall, paragraphs A to C of this measure, read together with paragraph C of the third measure, seek the court's ruling on the merits that evacuation calls, the current humanitarian situation and damage to buildings all amount to deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life within the meaning of Article 2C of the Convention. The reality is that the conflict and the humanitarian situation cannot be resolved overnight. This provisional measure seems designed to ensure that Israel will be in breach of it as soon as it is made. Its sole purpose seems to be to prejudice the merits, not to preserve rights on an interim basis. It should also not be granted. The sixth requested measure incorporates two separate measures. The first of these would require Israel to ensure that its military and organisations and persons subject to its control do not commit acts falling within Articles 2 or 3 of the Convention. It's analogous to the second provisional measure in the Bosnia and Myanmar cases, respectively. But an objection to this is the reference to any irregular armed units or individuals that may be directed, supported, or otherwise influenced by Israel. This wording has simply been copied from the second provisional measure in the Bosnia and Myanmar cases. However, in those cases, the applications instituting proceedings expressly allege the existence of irregular armed units. The reference is inappropriate in this case. There's no suggestion of forces other than the Israel Defense Forces on whose commitment to international humanitarian law you have and will be addressed on today. The second part of the sixth provisional measure contains an obligation to punish genocide. No such provision was included in the Bosnia or Myanmar provisional measures order. Punishment of genocide is not something that needs to be done urgently in order to protect claim rights on a provisional basis. This measure should also not be granted. The seventh provisional measure also comprises two separate measures. The first would require Israel to take measures to prevent destruction of evidence. The court has indicated such a measure on two recent occasions, but declined to do so on two other recent occasions, despite a specific request by the applicant. In the cases where it was granted, the application for provisional measures specifically alleged that evidence was being destroyed or concealed. In this case, South Africa makes just a bare assertion that there are serious concerns about the destruction of evidence and its effect on future investigation into crimes, and a hampering of scrutiny of Israel's actions. South Africa appears to suggest that the effects of the military operations themselves amount to destruction of evidence, making this yet a further provisional measure, effectively seeking a suspension of military operations. The granting of this measure would imply that there is some...
I mean, basically this whole thing boils down to if you force us to not destroy evidence, and if you force us to not do all of these things, then it just means not doing a military operation at all. So he's kind of saying that all these things are inevitable within they're all within the scope of the military operation. I mean, he's saying that those things are not happening to begin with, but it literally all boils down to just let us do our thing. Just let us do our military operation, even if it results in all these things. I mean, he's not saying even if, because he's arguing that those things are just not happening at all to begin with. But it's so stupid. I mean, he's just saying, don't get in the way of us carrying out our military operations and dealing with Hamas in however way we see fit.
Measures orders, but on 4 other occasions it was refused, despite being specifically requested by the applicant. This shows that such measures are not routinely granted. They've been granted occasionally when specific action has been indicated. In Armenia versus Azerbaijan, the court said that a report was necessary in view of the specific provisional measures it's decided to indicate and in light of the undertakings made by the agent of Azerbaijan. South Africa does not justify the inclusion of such a measure. There is no shortage of publicly available Israeli material and reports about the present situation in Gaza. Finally, the 9th requested measure is a non-aggravation measure. On 2 recent occasions, such a measure was specifically requested by the applicant but not granted by the court. Again, such a measure is not the norm, and again, South Africa does not justify its necessity. Provisional measures for non-aggravation have been indicated in cases where both parties have been directly involved as actors in the facts of the case, and the provisional measures have always applied equally to both parties. Thus, in Myanmar, the court declined to grant such a measure. An obligation of non-aggravation cannot fairly be imposed on only one party to a case or only one party to a conflict. If the proposed measure was granted, South Africa would remain free to aggravate its claim dispute with Israel, and Hamas would not be impeded from escalating the conflict with Israel. The only purpose of this provisional measure appears to be to prevent Israel from responding to any such escalations. Again, there's no justification for this measure. Madam President, members of the Court, that concludes my arguments on the inappropriateness of the specific measures requested by South Africa. I thank you for your careful attention. I invite you to call on Mr. Noam, co-agent of Israel, to conclude Israel's arguments.
I thank Mr. Staker, and I now invite the co-agent of Israel, Mr. Gilad Noam, to address the Court. You have the floor, sir.
Madam President, members of the Court, Counsel have shown that the applicant has failed to make the case for the indication of provisional measures. More specifically, 1. The Court lacks prima facie jurisdiction, as the applicant has not shown any dispute between itself and the respondent at the time the application was submitted. Indeed, it tried to mislead the Court into believing that one had existed. 2. The applicant has failed to meet the condition of plausible rights to be protected in the present circumstances. 3. The simple reality is that the events which are the subject of these proceedings are occurring in the framework of a war instigated by Hamas, governed by the legal framework of international humanitarian law. They do not fall within the remit of the Genocide Convention. 4. The standard of irreparable harm and urgency is not met either. Israel is constantly taking concrete steps, together with others, to address the humanitarian situation in Gaza. 5. Finally, we have shown...
I mean, this is really the argument. This is really what they've said for decades. This is what they've been saying the whole time, that actually their occupation is humane, that actually the siege is humane, and they allow and blah, 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 and all this BS. And it's what they've been saying for decades, and people have kind of believed it, but I just don't think that people are going to believe it anymore. But it's hard for me to say, oh my god. Oh, you know what? My, okay, I don't know what to do now. I'll probably end the stream anyway. But the thing, the podium stand thing died, so then my phone fell. But basically, I don't know, it's kind of hard for me to say whether people are going to believe this stuff or not, because I mean, people who know about this issue, Palestinians and allies and stuff like that, like, it's been obvious to us from the start, and it's like weird, like gaslighting when we talk to people, and people start to talk about how Israel is like oh my gosh, like recently, like I hear people say that Israel, blah, 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 something is a first world country. It's like people are still talking about first world, third world country, and they're talking in these terms, and they're talking about Israel being a democracy. It's like, do we live on the same planet? It's unfathomable, and people really think this way, and it's just hard for me to understand. It's just really hard for me to understand how people can really just see this way. They just live in a different world. Or maybe I'm the one who lives in a different world, and that's why it's like gaslighting. I swear to God, it's just gaslighting. So I don't really know what else to say at this point. I mean, to me, that's why I'm saying, like, this to me, it's nothing new. Like, I know these arguments by heart at this point. Like, I knew what they were going to say. So I just... If people were able to turn a blind eye to the Nakba, to the Naksa, to the to all the intifadas and like the occupation and the siege and every single war on Gaza, if they could turn a blind eye to that, why can't they turn a blind eye to this? So I'm worried that people are going to turn a blind eye to this as well, and they're just going to believe all this bull crap. So I just don't have anything more to add. I mean, you can go and finish it. My thing died, so I have to go anyway. I don't know. Thank you guys for not watching, but just like being here with me. I really appreciate it. I mean, I just want to say if there's anyone watching, like, I see you because I really feel that I am not seen all the time. Like, and I feel like I'm living in a parallel world where nothing is true and nothing matters. So hopefully, let's hope for a good resolution to this. Otherwise, the whole world is gonna catch on fire because really, like I read in this earlier comment, like if this is allowed, then everything is allowed, and everything has been allowed. So I just kind of, I mean, I already lost my faith in humanity, but this, I mean, really just drives me crazy. So I don't know. Let's hope for the best, I guess. But people are still dying in Gaza every single day. I mean, that's an understatement. Like, and not even just dying, but the trauma and the injuries, it's just completely unconscionable. I need to stop thinking about it because I know where I stand. So that's all I have to say. See you guys very soon. I might even do another live stream today, like, and just do like Arabic related stuff. Yeah, because I have some announcements to make anyway. So I'm not sure really, but I'm sure I will see you guys very soon. Take care.